Hi folks, this is Big Ted in Oz, just showing you how I've recently changed the front tyre on my Honda ST1300 without using any special tools. Enjoy! Okay, first thing off are the brake calipers. 2 bolts top and bottom to free up the caliper completely from the wheel. Be careful when you're taking the right hand side caliper off. You've got an optical sensor there for the ABS, and you certainly don't want to damage that. Just be very careful as you're sliding it off. When it's off, check for the brake pads to make sure you've got plenty of wear. You may as well change them now if you haven't. Mine are okay. Once the caliper's off, just put a spacer in between the 2 brake pads to prevent any accidental closure of the calipers. Loosen the restraining bolts at the bottom, free up the axle. Do that both sides, and then remove the axle itself. Okay, because I don't have a jack, I'm not jacking the bike up at all. I'm just going to put a heavy weight on the back of the bike to gently lift the front off the ground. As you can see, it's only about 12 kilo weight on the very back for me. Then I'm going to support the front tyre just to be able to take its weight. So the bike's weight is off the front, but the tyre's supported underneath. Then gently tap the axle through. I don't have the genuine Honda tool to extract it. But if you're very careful, it's right, as long as you're supporting the weight okay. And then using some sort of, say, an Allen key or something, hook that into the axle and just extract it, wiggling the tyre a little bit to free it up. Again, just taking the weight off the tyre, the axle itself. Now, since I didn't jack the front of the bike up, I've only elevated off the ground a few inches, so that front wheel won't roll out from underneath that mud guard as it is. So off it comes, 6 bolts, fairly easy to do. You can see both old and new, PR3 versus a PR4, over 37,500 kilometres out of the PR3, very happy with that. Right on the edge of its use though, but it's certainly time to change. Looking forward to the PR4. Okay, with a valve tool, extract the valve very carefully. You don't want it to fly out and all of a sudden you've lost it. Notice that I've got the wheel resting on 2 pieces of wood just to protect the rim and the rotors. You certainly don't want them touching the ground underneath. Okay, now's the fun part. I'm just using pieces of wood and it's a rubber mallet. Chose rubber mainly because it's not going to damage the rim if I do make contact, as you'll see I do in a moment. All I'm doing here is trying to push the tyre off the bead on the rim. Rotate it. You'll probably need to do this 2 or 3 times, and just use a bit of leverage very carefully, and you will find it actually comes off relatively easy, to be perfectly honest. Once you've got most of it off, you can push it down by hand on one side and then turn it over to do the second side. When you're doing this, be very careful. You've got a rotor there that's going to be exposed. Bang! You don't want to be doing that. I didn't damage mine, luckily, but should you lean on it too hard, it could cost you a couple of $100 for a new rotor. Certainly something you want to avoid. Okay, now to get the tyre off the rim. To protect the rim here, I'm just using a piece of 19mm garden hose, or polypipe we call it here in Australia. Just a very hard plastic, but it's quite thin and tough. And all I've done is just slit it down the side, down one edge with a pair of scissors. It just fits neatly over the edge of the rim. It's all you need. You don't need to go and spend anything on all sorts of gadgets and things. The pipe's fine. I did spend about $14 each on 2 tyre irons. You do need those. They're shaped a certain way, and it just makes it easy to get them off. An investment well worth spending money on, basically. Very gently find the edge of the tyre. Notice I'm kneeling on the back end of the tyre here, and because the tyre's loose on the rim, I'm actually trying to keep the tyre central to the rim itself to actually maximise the play and therefore the stretch over the outside edge that I'm prizing over the front. So you find it doesn't take much effort at all, as long as you're positioning the tyre properly inside the rim on the back end where my knee is. Repeat that. You'll need to do it at least twice with two irons. I don't think you'll need a third. And if you do, you're probably going to need an extra pair of hands, as you'll see in a moment. But it doesn't take much to pop it off. It might be because it's the PR3, which is potentially a slightly softer tyre or edge tyre than the PR4. Yeah, not a lot of effort, to be perfectly honest. You could try and use levers the tyre irons to get the tyre off for the second side, but to be honest, the PR3 itself is actually soft enough that you just pull it off. Just need to wiggle it a little bit, and you'll find it's actually not too hard. Just take the weights off for balancing. Save these for later because these can be reused, these particular ones. Now to mount the tyre on the rim. I'm actually using a technique I found on YouTube. Essentially, you use cable ties to tighten the tyre itself up as much as you possibly can off the rim. And effectively, you want to close the gap between the two inside edges to make just one big chunk of rubber, effectively. And you'll find that's a lot easier to get on the rim, as we'll see later. So just about 12 or so cable ties all the way around. You certainly need bigger ones than I've got. Mine were too short. Couldn't be bothered getting some more, so I'm pairing them up, as you can see. They're about 300mm long each. You need probably around 370 to 400. Just space them around evenly, and once you get them in position roughly, we're going to tighten them up. Okay, now going around the tyre, tighten them as tight as you possibly can. You see the two rubber edges on the inside are almost touching. Get them to touch if you possibly can. What this is going to do is basically treat the levering of the tyre onto the rim as just one action, rather than having to deal with both sides separately. I initially didn't do this. I actually tried it without this, and it's certainly a lot easier with the cable ties. I ended up having to take the tyre off. I couldn't actually get the second side on. That's what made it hard. When you're ready, a bit of soapy water around the rim and the tyre. Certainly makes it a lot easier to get on. Again, using the pieces of pipe, protect the rim. You should only need 2. Again, similar sort of positions at about 10 o'clock and 2 o'clock. When you're putting it on, you're going to be using your knees again to hold the edge closest to you in position. And again, that needs to be as central to the rim as possible to give as much room and play in the tyre at the top end away from you to stretch over the outside of that rim. So you find as I'm doing this, I'm kneeling keeping my knees on top of the tyre to make sure I'm holding it down close to me. Using a tyre iron, again, be very careful to make sure you have got a good purchase on the piece of plastic protecting it. Just lever it over once on one side, move it around, move yourself around. Again, I'm using knees to keep it down, and then just one more tyre iron. The other position should be enough to pop it on. And it seriously does not take a lot of force to do this. I was very concerned with the GT tyre in particular for the PR4 on the ST that it was going to be way too hard to do this, but this is just makes it so easy. Hey, there you are, very easy. Now just progressively go around cutting off all of the cable ties, because I've got doubles up here, a little bit finicky sometimes, but again, these are obviously cost about 30 cents worth of cable ties, definitely worth doing. Okay, to reseat the bead of the tyre we need to return the valve and start pumping away. You'll need something fairly heavy. A small standard compressor won't cut it. You won't be able to have the right pressure. Yeah. When it gets far enough, it'll actually pop both sides. And that's the bead seating on each side. Once you've done that, release the air pressure. There's an awful lot of air in there at the moment to be able to do that, so get it down to a relatively normal pressure level. Check the rim, make sure it is seated on both sides. Run your finger around the edge and then you're done. Once you've done that, you can pump the tyres up to the regular pressure you'd use. I use 44 pounds on mine, on the old PR3s, and I tend to do the same on the PR4s. 37,000 kilometres, I can't argue with that, and they handled very well, so I'm quite happy there. Okay, now to balance. I'm going to use a static balance. I've got two bearings for the front wheel, spare bearings. I'll talk about those later. Use the axle, one bearing on one side, bearing on the other, and I'm going to suspend this between two pieces of wood you'll see behind. And that's going to take the weight and pretty much freewheel the wheel completely, taking all friction away. And I'm just going to let gravity find the heavy spot. That'll sink to the bottom. Trial and error, rotate it around. I've got some stick-on weights from the local tyre shop. He's quite happy to give them to me. They get them for free anyway. Just find a few test spots. Once you've found the heavy place, do it on both sides of the tyre, inside and out, or left and right side of the tyre. As it moves around, you'll see the heavy spot shifts. All you need to do is move the weights, add more weights, and eventually you'll find when you've put them in the right place that the tyre doesn't rotate, continue to rotate when you've moved the tyre around. There's plenty of stuff on YouTube for this, so look up static balance motorcycle tyre and you'll find everything you need to know there. Very, very easy to do. While I started the balancing process with the stick-on weights, I ended up using the original clamp-on weights, primarily because they fit to the centre line of the wheel, and they're pretty easy to get on, as you can see. They just push straight on. What you don't see me doing here is actually rebalancing the wheel, but it's exactly the same process, obviously. Okay, the wheel's done. Now we can return it to the bike. First of all, we need to re-grease the front axle, but before we do that, clean everything out, get all the old gunk off, give it a good old wipe. I'm just going to use regular axle grease, plenty of it, just on the axle and on the insides of the openings in the fork themselves. Use plenty. You can wipe it off later if you do get excess. Also put some on the inside of the wheel bearings themselves. It should be noted too, as you've probably guessed, I had some spare bearings. I would have replaced the bearings on the wheel anyway. I typically try and do that every time I change a tyre. Unfortunately, my wife was very sick this day and I just needed to, I didn't have very much time, I just needed to get this bit done. But at the very least, put some oil in there, sorry, not oil, grease, and again, just as a typical thing you do if you're going to take the wheel off and put it back on. Next time, the bearings. Wheel it back in, again prop it up, push the axle through and start tightening things up. The Haynes service manual said to clamp the or torque up the axle first, which I did. In doing so, I've actually tightened the opposite retaining bolt on the right hand side as I'm sitting, so the left hand fork, just to hold the axle still, because again I didn't have the right Honda tool. So I'm tightening it just to make sure I can torque it up properly. Once the axle's torqued up, loosen off the opposite side, the left side of the bike. The Haynes manual says to tighten the right hand fork bolts first and then apply refit the caliper on the right hand side and then do the left side. I'm not quite sure why, but I followed the book. When you're putting the calipers on, again be very careful of the pads and certainly on the right hand side, the ABS sensor. A bit of Loctite in those caliper bolts, you don't want those coming out. Again, right side first, all tightened up, and then the left side. Torque everything up. So once we've torqued everything up, we're going to freewheel the front wheel off the ground to make sure it's all free and spinning freely, and then apply the brakes to make sure they actually work. Then take it for a spin. ABS lights on. That should disappear when we start rolling forward. There we go. There you go, folks. Hope you enjoyed it.